The room was loud, chaotic, even. Voices clashed like swords, each speaker more desperate than the last to prove a point. One man stood up, waving his arms, raising his voice until it cracked with emotion. Another cut in, louder, harsher, piling words on top of words. A debate? Number A. Battle of egos. But in the far corner, there was a man who hadn't said a word. Not once. He sat with his hands gently clasped, eyes steady, mouth still. And yet, something strange happened. One by one, eyes drifted away from the noise and turned toward him. The loudest voices blurred into background static. The room began to orbit around the one man who hadn't spoken. Why do we trust the quiet ones? It's a strange paradox. We live in a world that rewards noise, likes, shares, shouts across social platforms. Yet time and again, when things truly matter, we lean in to hear the ones who say the least. Because silence, in the right hands, becomes presence, authority, power. Niccolò Machiavelli knew this better than most. He wasn't a general, he wasn't a king. He held no army, no wealth, no throne, and yet rulers feared him. Courts whispered about him. His name still echoes through centuries, not because of what he screamed from balconies, but because of what he calculated in silence. He watched, he wrote, he listened when others boasted, and he won. Winning. Without words, that was his game. Machiavelli understood a brutal truth. The more you speak, the more you reveal. In politics, in war, in love, words can become weapons. But when misused, they're weapons you hand to the enemy. He believed that the one who speaks least, but thinks most, is often the one who walks away with everything. Not because he was passive, but because he understood when not to speak. We've all felt it. The tension in the air when someone chooses silence instead of response. The discomfort when a question goes unanswered. The mystery of someone who doesn't rush to explain themselves. That feeling, the power of it, Machiavelli didn't just recognize it, he weaponized it. So before we go deeper into his methods, his philosophy, and the chilling elegance of how he moved through a world of chaos without uttering a word too many, let me ask you this. Have you ever won just by saying nothing? Have you ever watched someone lose control just because you refuse to speak? If so, you know the power we're about to explore. Take a moment. Think back to that time, and if it lingers in your mind, share it below. Because sometimes silence isn't absence, it's dominance. Now let's uncover how Machiavelli mastered that quiet storm. Machiavelli was never the kind of man who inspired with grand speeches or stirring declarations. He didn't win by rallying crowds or shouting over opposition. No moved in silence. He observed. He adjusted. And when the moment was right, he acted with precision. To understand his strategy is to understand a truth that makes many uncomfortable. Not all power needs to announce itself. The strongest forces in nature rarely do. A storm doesn't knock first. A shadow doesn't ask for permission. Think of a wolf on the hunt. It doesn't bark. It doesn't growl. It moves low, silent, calculating every step. It conserves energy. It waits for the moment when noise would cost it everything. Then, when the timing is perfect, it strikes. If you hear it coming, it's already too late. This was Machiavelli's way. He once said, "Never attempt to win by force what can be won by deception." But deception, in his world, didn't mean lies, it meant control. And control begins with restraint. We've been taught that speaking up is power, that the louder voice wins the room, that confidence means expressing every thought, defending every position, asserting dominance through volume. But pause for a second. Look around your life. In a meeting, Who really holds control, the one who fills every silence with words, or the one who watches, listens, waits? Who makes the final call? More often than not, it's the quiet one, the observer, the strategist. Because while the talker gives everything away, their fears, their motives, their intentions, the silent one holds all their cards close. They become unpredictable, unreadable, untouchable. That is not weakness, that is strategy. You think speaking up is strength, but sometimes silence is domination. Machiavelli mastered the art of making people talk while he said almost nothing. In negotiations, in court politics, in moments of crisis, he understood one vital truth: people fear what they can't read. And silence makes you unreadable. In fact, the person who listens most often becomes the one everyone eventually listens to. That quiet presence, it builds tension. It demands attention without asking for it. And in a world full of noise, silence becomes a rare currency. Picture this: you're in a group discussion. Everyone is chiming in, eager to contribute, to be seen, to be heard. But there's that one person, the one who waits until the very end to speak. And when they do, everyone stops. They listen. Why? Because silence made their voice heavier. That's the kind of weight Machiavelli understood. He wasn't telling us to be passive. He was telling us to be intentional. Every silence should serve a purpose. Every withheld word is a weapon not yet drawn. And when you choose to speak, when the silence finally breaks, it cuts deeper. There's a misconception that being quiet means being timid, but nothing is further from the truth. Silence can be uncomfortable. It forces others to fill the gap. It pressures people to expose themselves while you remain still. In many ways, it is an act of control more profound than any monologue. This is the paradox Machiavelli lived by. Power doesn't always roar. Sometimes it whispers, and sometimes it says nothing at all. So ask yourself, when was the last time your silence said more than your words ever could? When was the last time you let others talk themselves into corners while you sat still and saw the bigger picture? That isn't passivity. That's strategy. That's the art of silence. Italy in the late 15th century was a land in chaos. City-states rose and fell like waves. Assassinations were common. Betrayal was currency. Power shifted hands not through elections or negotiations, but through backroom deals, arranged marriages, poisonings, and well-timed silence. Amid this storm stood a man with no army, no noble blood, and no crown. He held no land, no wealth to boast of, no legacy to inherit. But he carried something far more dangerous mind. That man was Niccolò Machiavelli. He wasn't a warrior, he was a watcher, a student of men. While others fought over thrones, Machiavelli studied those who sat on them. He served in the Florentine Republic as a diplomat, often stationed at courts surrounded by lies, threats, and shifting allegiances. He didn't try to outtalk kings, he observed them. He didn't seek glory in public, he wrote in private. And from the shadows, he crafted something far more lasting than a reign, the Prince. This was no ordinary book. It wasn't a manifesto of ideals, it was a manual of survival, cold, sharp, honest. In it, Machiavelli didn't preach virtue, he studied power. He detailed how rulers rise, how they fall, and what separates the survivors from the idealists. One of his most haunting lessons reads, "The prince must be a fox to recognize traps and a lion to frighten wolves." But the most dangerous trap, he implied, was not set by others. It was set by your own words. In Machiavelli's world, talking too much was not just careless, it was fatal. Words, he warned, should never be used to reveal your heart. They should be used to veil your purpose. Let your intentions remain unreadable. Let your enemies guess. Let your silence make them nervous. Picture Machiavelli in court, sitting silently along the edges of a grand hall while a duke gave impassioned speeches about loyalty and honor. While the court applauded, Machiavelli wrote. He didn't argue. He didn't challenge the duke to his face. He took notes. He learned the patterns. He watched which men flinched at which words, who smiled too quickly, who hesitated. He wasn't interested in appearances. He wanted patterns. He wanted the truth behind the performance. Because while others debated, he documented. While others spoke, he calculated. It's easy to think of him as cold, manipulative. But Machiavelli wasn't without morality. He was simply a man who accepted reality for what it was, not what we wished it to be. He didn't see the world as a place where good people always win. He saw it as a chessboard. And on that board, silence was a piece too many ignored. He knew that power didn't come from shouting the loudest. It came from understanding the rules better than anyone else and then bending them until they bent to you. In fact, Machiavelli didn't play by the rules. He wrote new ones. He saw how kings could be toppled by their own advisors, how the mob could be stirred with the right lie, how leaders could lose everything not because they were unfit, but because they were too honest, too loud, too predictable. So he chose another path. He played the long game. His silence wasn't empty, was loaded with intention. Every pause was a test. Every withheld opinion gave him more room to observe. He understood that people reveal more when they believe no one is watching. He became the invisible mirror that reflected their truth back to them. And when he finally wrote The Prince, it wasn't to create a perfect leader. It was to expose how leaders survive in an imperfect world. To read Machiavelli is to realize that the world rewards not just intelligence, but discipline, not just speech, but strategy, not just presence, but patience. His influence outlasted empires because it spoke to something primal, a truth most fear to admit. The world is not always fair, but it can be understood. And once you understand it, you can navigate it not by force, not by noise, but by clarity, timing, and silence. That was Machiavelli's true strength. In a time of noise and fire, he stayed still. He watched the storm pass, and when the silence returned, he was the only one left standing. Not because he shouted louder, but because he whispered smarter. He sat on the throne, unmoving. Not a word left his lips. Around him, lords and generals whispered nervously, unsure of his mood, his thoughts, his intentions. Some begged for favor. Others tried to read his silence like a riddle. But none dared raise their voice too high. None dared move without a signal. Because in that stillness complete and absolute, he held the room in the palm of his hand. He didn't need to speak. He didn't even need to glance. His power came not from the volume of his voice, but from the weight of his presence. The less you say, the more mysterious you become. And mystery is power. In a world obsessed with self-expression, with constantly proving and defending and declaring, silence becomes unsettling. It creates a void, and the human mind hates a void. It tries to fill it with assumptions, fears, possibilities. That is where control begins. Machiavelli understood that silence was not passive. It was calculated. It was a pressure tactic. In negotiations, the person who can sit in silence longer often controls the room, because silence forces others to act. It makes them uncomfortable. It draws out their insecurities. It exposes their desperation. When two people argue, listen closely. One starts calm, the other more emotional. But as the conversation goes on, the person who refuses to be pulled into the noise becomes a mirror. The emotional speaker, unchecked, begins to unravel. Their logic breaks down, their points blur into attacks, their voice rises, and the more they speak, the less control they have. Meanwhile, the silent one grows stronger with every second. They have said nothing, yet they dominate the space. Why? Because silence absorbs power, it draws attention, it demands patience, and most importantly, it leaves room to maneuver. Think back to a moment in your life, a heated conversation, a confrontation, a disagreement where you chose not to respond. Not because you had nothing to say, but because you knew that silence was the sharper blade. Remember how the other person kept talking, trying to get a reaction out of you, trying to drag you into their chaos, and how, as you held your silence, they began to contradict themselves, lose focus, or even apologize. Not because you argued better, but because your stillness exposed their imbalance. That is the power Machiavelli spoke of, not loud victories, but silent ones. He believed that when you speak, you give shape to your thoughts, and in doing so, you give away your strategy. But when you remain silent, your thoughts are a fortress. Others have nothing to grip onto, nothing to predict, nothing to use. Silence becomes a mask, a shield, a weapon. It makes others talk more than they should. It invites assumptions. It creates pressure without effort. In politics, Machiavelli knew that those who waited, who said less often, ended up controlling more. He watched leaders destroy themselves not because they lacked power, but because they could not resist the urge to speak. They overpromised. They exposed weaknesses. They invited rebellion through their need to be understood. But the leader who remains still, who chooses words with care and speaks only when necessary, radiates a different kind of authority, one that does not beg for recognition but commands it. Silence is not the absence of power, it is its most potent form. There is a reason the most dangerous people in the room are often the quietest. They are not silent because they are weak. They are silent because they are watching, calculating, waiting. Their words, when finally spoken, cut deeper than any outburst. This is not about avoiding confrontation. It is about owning your timing, about mastering the rhythm of your presence, about choosing when to speak and when to let the weight of your silence do the speaking for you. Stillness is not emptiness. It is strategy. It is presence. It is power waiting to be unleashed. So next time you find yourself in a moment of tension, in a situation where noise surrounds you, try stillness. Watch what happens when you don't react, when you let others show their hands first. In that space, you'll find control. In that silence, you'll find strength. Because silence doesn't mean nothing is happening. It means everything is being calculated. They gave away the game before it even started. Not with betrayal, not with action, but with words. Too many men have lost everything, not because they were outmatched, but because they couldn't stop talking. They spoke to impress, to assert, to dominate. And in doing so, they exposed their own playbook. This is the tragedy of the talker. They crave attention. They need validation. So they speak endlessly, revealing plans, emotions, fears, and intentions without realizing that every word is a tool. And in the wrong hands, that tool becomes a weapon against them. Machiavelli knew this pattern too well. He had seen kings undone not by betrayal from others, but by self-inflicted wounds made of their own words. The ruler who boasts of future conquests becomes a target before the first arrow flies. The general who reveals strategy in the war room invites defeat before the battle begins. They fall not because they are weak, but because they believe talking makes them strong. But strength doesn't need to announce itself. Real power is often silent. Consider the man who constantly talks about his next big move. He paints vivid pictures of his vision. He shares every detail: who he'll confront, what he'll say, how he'll win. And those listening, they take notes, they prepare, they counter. By the time he acts, the world has already anticipated every step. His surprise is gone. His advantage is lost. He spoke himself into failure. Now compare him to the one who says little, who keeps his ambitions close and his plans hidden. He makes no promises. He offers no details. And when he acts, no one sees it coming. That is not luck. That is discipline. There is a psychology behind over-talking. Most people speak to fill silence because silence feels vulnerable. It feels exposed. But in truth, excessive talking is often a mask cone worn to cover insecurity. The louder someone speaks, the more they try to prove themselves. But confidence doesn't need proof. It only needs presence. Machiavelli saw silence as a sign of control. He understood that restraint is not weakness, but strength under command. And those who truly hold power have no need to advertise it. Those who speak to impress often reveal what they should have kept. Every word shared is a piece of your inner world offered to someone else. And in the wrong context, that information becomes leverage. The more you reveal, the less you control. That's the cruel irony. Talkers believe they're leading, but often they are being led by their own need to be seen, to be understood, to be praised. The ones who last, the ones who win quietly and consistently, are not those who explain themselves to the world. They are the ones who let results speak in their place. So ask yourself, how many times have you weakened your own position by saying too much? How many times did silence feel uncomfortable, and so you filled it with words you later regretted? This is not a call to stay quiet always. It's a call to speak with purpose, not impulse. To understand that silence is not just absence, it's protection. It is the art of holding your power close until it's time to strike. Because in the end, it is not the noise that survives. It is the clarity beneath it. Machiavelli never told us to be mute. He never praised silence for its own sake. What he taught was far more precise, words like weapons, not always drawn, but always sharpened. He didn't believe in silence as a rule. He believed in silence as a choice. That choice begins with one simple question: when should you speak, and when should you wait? Knowing the answer is what separates noise from mastery. There are moments when silence disarms. Picture a job interview. The room is tense. The interviewer asks a pointed question and leans back, expecting a rapid answer. But you pause. You breathe. You look them in the eye without rushing. That pause, just a few seconds longer than expected, forces them to lean forward. Their confidence flickers. They begin to fill the space you left open, and in doing so, they reveal more than they planned. This is the power of making others speak first, the art of turning pressure around, the ability to hold your ground, not with words, but with patience. The same holds true in conflict, in relationships, in negotiations. When tension rises, most people feel an urge to explain themselves, to justify, to defend. But often, the one who holds silence calmly creates discomfort in the other. That discomfort leads to slips, overreactions, and eventually, truth. Stillness invites confession. But this is not about manipulation. It's about awareness. It's about stepping into a moment with clarity, understanding the weight of your presence, and choosing when to let it speak for you. Because silence is not the absence of voice, it's the command of timing. Anyone can speak, but not everyone knows when to speak. That's what Machiavelli mastered, and that's what makes silence an art. So ask yourself, have you ever won just by saying nothing? Have you ever held a room, turned a conversation, or protected your power through silence? If so, that was no accident. That was you learning the language Machiavelli spoke best. Share your silent victory below. Somewhere in that quiet moment, you became the one in control. Machiavelli didn't whisper to be quiet. He whispered to be heard louder. In a world filled with noise, he chose stillness. In a time ruled by voices, he let silence carry the weight. And somehow, centuries later, we're still listening. If this made you rethink how power truly moves, take a moment, subscribe, and stay close. The louder the world becomes, the more we need to understand the strength in saying less. Because silence, when used right, doesn't disappear. It echoes,